Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where I break down the lessons we can learn as GMs and as players from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling episode 65, The Streets of Ank'Harel. Before we begin, look, you've probably already heard about the change coming to Patreon soon, but if you haven't, the short explanation is that starting in November, if you sign up for a Patreon through the phone app, and I believe through the Google Chrome browser as well, the creator's going to get shortchanged. It doesn't affect your ongoing memberships, but if you've been thinking about joining the Patreon for a while, maybe you're considering signing up in the next month or two, or after the holidays, or you have no interest in being my patron, but you've had your eye on another creator you want to support, starting in November, we're really going to encourage you to make your initial sign up through a browser instead of the app, and ideally, not through Google Chrome. You can then continue to use the app or whatever browser you want to interact with the Patreon, to interact with the content, but if you use an app to sign up going forward, starting in November, Patreon is essentially going to use your sign up to pay for their service fee to Apple, so the Patreon creator gets less. So once again, even if this doesn't affect how you plan to interact with my content in any way, just a word of warning that this change is coming due to some corporate shenanigans between two companies, so you should be prepared for that. However, I have another announcement that is actually a lot cooler. I just launched another channel for video essays that have nothing to do with D&D. I've uploaded my first one, it's also about finding Forrester, so now you know why that movie was on my mind last week. And there's also a trailer for all of the essays I plan to release over the next year. I'm planning to do a video every month, and so I've got a bunch of them mapped out. So please go check that out. Check out the channel, consider supporting it and subscribing, that would be amazing. Now on with the show. Speaking of ads, this episode features Sam's first real, proper ad read, where we get some true shenanigans. I'm not going to call out each of Sam's ads going forward. There's entire YouTube videos dedicated to compiling his ad reads, and I'm not exactly planning to promote companies just because they bought airtime on Critical Role 8 or 9 years ago, but this is honestly still to this day one of my favorite Sam Riegel ads, so I wanted to highlight it.
If you use the promo code Critical Role, you'll get $3 off your first month. It doesn't sound like a lot, you think? That's 1.2 gallons of gas at the Quick Mart down the street, regular unleaded. Or let's say you're generous, you give loot crates to everyone in your family. That's 4 loot crates, that's $12. That is 25 and a half forever stamps that you've just gotten for free.
Wow.
For free. Let's say you're more generous than that. You give loot crates to everyone in your whole company, all 266 employees. You've just saved enough money to buy a 2002 Kia Sedona with 181,000 miles on it. The transmission is going out and it doesn't shift in the higher gears. But it is for $800 on Craigslist. Go look for it right now and it will be yours for free, essentially, if you buy 266 subscriptions to Loot Crate. 266.67. Okay, that is hardcore facts. You can't argue with that.
As the game opens, Vax and Keyleth essentially apologize to each other for getting in their own ways and not treating each other well. Keyleth finally says, "I love you," back to Vax, moving their relationship to the next level. Once this scene is done, Matt asks the group, "What's next? What are y'all doing?" And all they can say is they're sleeping in, they're having breakfast. You know, they're a little emotionally drained. They are answering his question very literally. What are they doing next? We're having breakfast. But he's asking, what's next for your D&D adventure? So when they don't give him anything, he has Zahra walk in from examining the ziggurats, and she has breakfast with them. And Matt just says, she spends breakfast with you guys, catching up on what has transpired and what your current plan of action is. Essentially, since the party isn't telling him what they want to do, and they seem so unwilling to just jump into the next adventure, he gives them an opportunity to enter a scene so they can start discussing it in character, and this actually does unstick them. Now, I don't know if this specific approach would work for every group. As you're probably aware, the players in Critical Role focus a lot more on role-playing scenes than most aspects of D&D gameplay, so giving them the opportunity to roleplay helps them a lot, but it might not help everyone the same way. However, when your players are essentially stalled in starting a session, I do think it's helpful to introduce an NPC or some other factor that they can react to get the players talking and thinking. They don't really discuss strategy with Zahra. Like, Percy asks her if her family might be of help, but when she says no, the party does pretty much still go into planning mode without her. She's not that instrumental to the scene. But this simple act of introducing someone to talk to and saying, okay, since you won't tell me what you want to do, why not just tell her what you want to do? That does seem to have worked, because the party starts discussing logistics for how to get to Ank'Harel and look for Cabal's Ruin, the magic-devouring cloak. This is the vestige that Percy has his eye on, since most of the other items they've heard about don't really apply to him or interest him, but the cloak seems like it's meant for him. And Gilmore can teleport the party there. Matt clarifies that Whitestone doesn't have a permanent teleportation circle like Amon or most other cities do, but Gilmore can spend enough magical energy to cast the spell once and send them to Ank'Harel. Before they leave, they get the ball rolling in tracking down a great big beast for Vorogol the Hunt. So Vox Machina can hopefully wear him down and attack him after that hunt. So they send Kashaw to the Slayer's Take with a letter from Vox Machina asking for any contracts they might know of that might fit what they're looking for. When they talk to him, Matt narrates that Kashaw is currently training the Whitestone militia. After all, he needed to find something for Kashaw to be doing to fill the time in Whitestone and make it clear that he's helping with the resistance, but he's not actively part of the Protect the City with the Shield plan. I'd imagine because if Ashley can join them for a game, Nat wants to be able to replace her with Kashaw and have him maintain the shield in her absence. So that can't be what he's working on. And given his fraught relationship with his goddess, it's pretty unlikely he'd be leading religious services or anything like that. So Matt narrates that he's training the new recruits in some basic spear work, which is appropriate since the spear is Kashaw's weapon of choice. Now Vex wonders if this is too important to pull Kashaw away from it for the errand, but Percy and Keyleth both agree that it really doesn't matter how well trained the people of Whitestone are, they're all gonna die if the dragons attack. So this act of training the militia is really just to keep everyone busy, not to actually prepare the city for war. And I just think it's funny that this is almost certainly very close to the actual reason Matt narrated Kashaw training the troops, because it's something helpful, but not essential. And it's basically just a way to demonstrate that Kashaw is around and contributing, but not doing anything so essential that he couldn't help with anything else. The same is true for Zahra, come to think of it. She says everyone else who used to be examining the ziggurat is now working on the shield, so she's taken over the ziggurat research. But by definition, that means that what she's doing is not as important as what everyone else is doing. That ziggurat isn't going anywhere, and she doesn't indicate she's made any meaningful progress. So if the players want to pull one or two of these NPCs away for a side quest, what they're doing isn't so essential to the resistance effort that they couldn't step away to go on a D&D adventure. Now it's worth noting that Vax is hoping they could instead recruit a metallic dragon to help fight Voragol rather than just some random monster. After all, metallic dragons are generally good creatures, and they're also intelligent, so a brass or bronze dragon would actually understand what Vox Machina was trying to do and would probably be willing to help. But since the party doesn't know where to find a metallic dragon, the Slayer's Take is still their best plan. However, they don't remember that Matt already foreshadowed this option to them the last time they visited the Slayer's Take, back in episode 57, right after the Umbersill fight. Vex had tried to sell some of the Umbersill scales, but the Slayer's Take doesn't buy just random monster parts. That's not how their business works. But Vanessa, the Slayer's Take Huntmaster, did offer the party a chance to sign up for some outstanding contracts, including a white dragon and a bronze dragon. Matt was already trying to point them toward the white dragon as their next target. And it's possible he had already decided that Voragol was hunting giant beasties, so he was offering a contract for a bronze dragon, maybe so they could specifically recruit someone to help fight/distract the white dragon, or even more generally than that, just to find out from the contract where they could maybe find a bronze dragon, and then instead of signing up for the contract, they could just track down the bronze dragon and recruit them to help out. However, at this point, Matt has already given the players a good motivation to hunt Voragol in the last episode, so he doesn't need to bring up the white dragon contract right now to incentivize them to hunt it. And in fact, given how short the contracts were from their Trial of the Take episodes, he might not want to remind them of the contracts in this episode, because that could pressure them to sign a contract right now, and then they'd maybe only have a few days to kill the dragon instead of the 2 weeks they just negotiated for. So Matt is probably thinking, okay, let's see how the Ank'Harel visit goes. If I want to give them the contracts for the white and bronze dragons, Kashaw can come back with them when he returns. But I don't need to do that right now, because it looks like we've got some time before this fight goes down. However, as this conversation with Kashaw is going on, Vax is worried that Grog is getting bored. So he grabs a wooden sword and swings at Grog to try to get him to spar with him. Vax voiced a similar worry in the last episode. When they were discussing taking a layover in Umbersill's lair to scry on Voragol, Vax asked if they could summon a monster or something to give Grog a chance to fight something when they got there, since the plan was to spend the night in Umbersill's lair, and since he was getting worried that Grog was getting bored. And before I weigh in with my thoughts on this general concept, let me run through how this specific scene goes.
No, if the creature dies, if the dragon kills the creature and then we all die and we can't harvest
get to
it,
bring
the
back
Slayer's
the things
Take doesn't
at
have
once.
anything from its previous contract.
But that could happen with any contract
Yeah,
and any
exactly.
band of
Yeah,
idiots. They could go die
written
on the
into
This is true.
battlefield.
They're used to having people die.
Well, fuck it.
I think Grog's getting
Fuck it
antsy.
indeed.
I like this. I'm going to have it drawn up.
I look
Yes.
over at Grog and see he's really bored, and I pick up a wooden sword and I hit him as hard as I can on the small of his back.
Yes!
Ooh!
Now, Travis is excited by this, but Grog doesn't immediately retaliate. He asks if Vax has a death wish, actually. Then Scanlan calls out to the militia to attack a Grog. You know, as training. Grog slams his knuckles together and doubles in size, scaring the piss out of these soldiers, and Matt basically has them freeze up. Kashaw says no, the gnome is screwing with you don't have to fight Grog. And then Grog asks Vax if he was just kidding around, before he then punts Vax like a soccer ball anyway, and then he excitedly examines his gauntlets to see if they've leveled up, because once again, they saw Vax's vestige get upgraded and now they're wondering if the other vestiges do the same thing. So it seems like Travis enjoyed this moment. It didn't take too long, the whole interaction took about 6 minutes of session time. However, I would still really warn you against this approach in your own games for a bunch of reasons. First of all, I don't know Travis Willingham, and Liam O'Brien does, so maybe in this moment, Travis really did just want to roll some dice and inflict some consequence-free fantasy violence, and didn't really matter who it was directed at. And if that's the case, then yeah, Liam nailed it. He saw what Travis needed to make him happy, and he provided it. However, I know that if I saw a player getting bored at my table, whether I'm the GM or another player, my solution wouldn't be, okay, well then let's do a quick interlude that absolutely does not matter. My solution would be, okay, let's stop digging around, let's go to Gilmore and have him send us to Marquette. When I ran my second campaign ever, one of my players started getting frustrated that they weren't getting into a lot of combats. They were resolving a lot of their conflicts by negotiating with the enemies or role-playing the conclusions. So near the end of one session, the party was attacked by a dire bear and some big bats out in the forest. And that player turned to me and said, wait, is this just happening because we haven't been in a fight in a while? And yeah, I mean, it was. But that wasn't what that player was looking for. They didn't just want combat for combat's sake. My guess is they wanted combat that actually moved the story forward. They wanted a fight that mattered. So I do understand Liam's impulse here to try to pacify Travis with some combat. And it essentially looks like it worked, though more on that in a second. But I would really warn you off of this approach in your own games, because it's probably better for everyone, including the bored player, to just stop doing the boring thing you're doing right now and get to the next exciting thing in store for the session. Now, Sam piggybacks off of Liam's moment and tries to recruit the entire militia to fight Grog, and Grog slams his knuckles together and enlarges in size, so he seems like he's down to throw down. And now Matt has to make a tough choice very quickly, because he could start running a fight where one superpowered monster fights a bunch of level 0 recruits, but it will obviously not be a challenge, and it'll probably take a while, especially since Matt tends to roll for every attack for every enemy in a group. However, despite the fact that this fight isn't going to be a challenge, Travis still seems excited for it. So Matt's other option is to hope that the reason for that is because Travis doesn't want to fight someone, he just wants to feel badass. That's the real thing he wants. So he has the militia members freeze in place, their knees knocking together, their armor rattling, and he goes with that option, because if he's wrong, then he can always switch gears and go ahead and give Grog the fight he wants. But if instead he goes straight into the fight, then he's locking himself into what could be a very extended and potentially unsatisfying sequence. Thankfully, once again, it seems like Matt knows Travis pretty well, because Travis doesn't give any indication that he's annoyed that the fight didn't happen. Then he kicks Vax, and this is just some harmless PvP. I would argue that it's actually more satisfying than their old prank war stuff ever was, because it really is over in just a moment, but it's also very clearly motivated by what just happened, and it's probably not going to kick off a whole long sequence. It's just a quick retaliation. And then Travis excitedly asks if the gauntlets changed now that he attacked an ally. Once again, that makes me wonder, did Travis Willingham long for combat no matter the circumstance? Did he want to do something badass and kicking Vax across the town square was satisfying enough? Or was he just hoping something interesting would happen to move the story forward, such as, potentially, upgrading his gauntlets? Again, I don't know the man, maybe this is just what he wanted to help tide him over for a while, but I really wouldn't recommend initiating PvP with your fellow players just because you feel someone's getting bored, because in my head, the logical solution is actually, okay, I know we're discussing logistics, but let's try to wrap this up and move on. Again, I speak from experience here. When I was a player in a brief Spelljammer game until my terrible schedule killed the campaign, I enjoyed playing someone who could look at all the different aspects of a situation and try to find the right answer. Like I've said before, I love the scenes in Critical Role where the party sits down and talks logistics and tries to solve the problem in front of them. However, I believe it was after only the second session that I realized the other players in the Spelljammer game weren't into this sort of gameplay. They weren't chiming in to discuss logistics, which meant they were just watching me have these conversations with myself, and then they were getting bored, maybe even frustrated. And so my solution wasn't, okay, I'm just gonna randomly provoke fights with them so we can roll some dice. My solution was, okay, playing someone who examines all the angles isn't fun for the table, so even though it's something that I like to do, let's try to curb that behavior so we can make most of our time at the table and keep the story moving forward. So that's my word of caution around this scene. I think this is very much a don't try this at home moment from the cast of Critical Role. Anyway, Percy writes his note to the Slayer's Take, and then Keyleth takes Kashaw to the Sun Tree to send him to Vasselheim. Before he goes through, he suggests that maybe he and Keyleth can get a drink when all this is done. And I'm not personally wild about Matt doing this with a guest player character when they're not present, rather than with just a normal NPC, since this may not necessarily line up with what Will Friedle was imagining his character would do. However, the sentiment behind this moment comes from a solid impulse to add some drama and complicate this subplot. Vax and Keyleth have just resolved their awkwardness and committed to some sort of relationship, so if you were telling a story, then at this point you'd want to add a little bit of drama. Can you present them with a new challenge to continue to test their relationship and give them something else to overcome? So I think it's where Kashaw's attempt to ask out Keyleth comes from. It's an effort from Matt to add a little wrinkle to the subplot now that the main thrust of the drama has been concluded. But Marisha literally responds to Matt, "Oh my god, why are you doing this to me? God, I hate you so much right now." Obviously, she's kidding to some degree, but both Marisha and Keyleth seem pretty uncomfortable with this attempt at flirtation from Kashaw. And very, very minor spoilers here, but this is basically never a thing again. So, since she really wasn't going for it, I suspect Matt might have backed off from the subplot. Of course, there's the added factor that the next time we check in with Kashaw, some big things will have happened, and so he might not have felt the need to throw in a dramatic wrinkle because enough dramatic stuff will have happened that trying to introduce a love triangle was no longer necessary. But either way, I do get where this impulse came from Matt to add a bit of a romantic rivalry. But I also think he made the right choice by reading the room and not pushing the issue past this scene. That's kind of really important when dealing with a romance in your game between a PC and an NPC, but that is probably a topic we'll talk about more another day. Anyway, they go to Gilmore, and he's starting to look pretty physically drained by keeping up the barrier. That's a great choice from Matt to, once again, do a few things at once. First of all, it helps explain why Gilmore isn't going to come with them to his homeland of Marquette. He can't leave the dome, he's needed here to keep casting spells. And since he can't be spared from Whitestone, that's one fewer spellcasting ally for them to recruit for the adventure. However, you also notice that these spells are clearly depleting Gilmore, in a way we normally don't see from the PCs when someone is low on spell slots. That's fair enough. The players have enough to keep track of, they don't have to act like this when they're almost out of spell slots. But once again, we see that Gilmore's health is being handled narratively, and not mechanically, just like after the encounter in Amon, the arrival of the Chroma Conclave. Now, according to the rules of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, there is no reason Gilmore would be so physically taxed from casting spells day after day. But Matt wants this barrier to feel important, both to help explain why Gilmore can't help them on their adventures, and potentially help explain why every city in the world doesn't have a barrier like this, which is one of the trickier parts of a high magic setting like Tal'Dorei. However, there is one more really cool thing this enables Matt to do in this game. It helps introduce a ticking clock. As we've discussed over the past few episodes of this series, Matt has been trying to get his players to move a little bit faster and get some more stuff done in every session. But his players love doing these scenes, and as much as these scenes are really terrific and literally make Critical Role what it is, they also do slow down gameplay. And then when you add to that the complication that 5e players always like to have all their resources before going into any new adventure, that adds yet another reason why they tend to keep having these long episodes where they do very little and then they take a long rest. Even in this session, after Keyleth casts Transport via Plants and Vax used a few luck points and Grog uses Knuckles, they do very briefly discuss staying in Whitestone for one more day and leaving tomorrow. Now, they don't entertain that idea for very long, but the fact that it was even suggested is kind of interesting. And I don't think that's at all exclusive to this group. I think that is something that just happens a lot in 5e games due to the way the edition is designed. Over the past 20 episodes, almost every time Matt has tried to implement a deadline or push them toward the next beat in the story, the party's either dealt with a different side quest or found some way to extend that deadline. This is probably the most literal in the previous episode when they were actually able to negotiate an extension with the Ravenites. But it's been happening ever since the party talked Lady Kima out of putting together a mission to go rescue Allura in Whitestone, and that was 20 episodes ago. But with Gilmore, Matt has introduced a ticking clock that the players can't negotiate with, because Gilmore is already an ally who doesn't need to be convinced to do anything for them, and he's not acting irrationally. What's happening to him is just a consequence of the huge favor they've asked him for, and the longer they take to solve the dragon problem, the more suffering they put Gilmore through. It's a really smart ticking clock, and a really great solution to the problem that Matt has been dealing with for a decent chunk of the Chroma Conclave storyline. Now, Gilmore gives them a little bit of an idea of what to expect when they get to Ank'Harel, although he hasn't really been back to Marquette in 15 years. He can't get them all the way to Ank'Harel, but they'll appear in the small town of Shandal. He asks them to say hello for him and deliver a locket. He says Vox Machina will know who he means when they get there. They go talk to Jarrett, who's also from there, and he has a very different opinion of Ank'Harel since he used to live there, and he can no longer return due to unnamed crimes he committed. He discusses Jaman Sa'ord, the enigmatic leader of Ank'Harel. Jaman has ruled the city for 400 years, and so some people speculate that Jaman is a godling walking among mortals, whereas others, like Jarrett, believe Jaman Sa'ord is just a title passed from person to person. This is fun because essentially these are the two extremes of fantasy world building. On one end of the spectrum, a god or a demigod literally walks among humanity and rules a city. On the other end, Jaman isn't supernatural at all, but simply seems supernatural thanks to superstition and folklore. Typically, we see the latter when a franchise is trying to distance itself from the more fanciful ideas, like in Batman Begins, when Ra's al Ghul isn't an immortal warrior, he's someone who uses surrogates to hide his identity. But obviously in your D&D games, magic is a thing, so I think it's really interesting that Matt essentially introduces Jaman Sa'ord lore by pointing out the two extremes of fantasy world building. Either a mortal or a bunch of mortals are pretending to be supernatural beings, or an important NPC is actually a god. The two genders. But this essentially prepares the players to not make any assumptions about who or what Jaman is, but it still does invite them to speculate, and that's a really fun middle ground. And I'm honestly curious what you do in your own games. Do you like having major supernatural beings living in cities and taking rulership positions, or do you prefer when mortals might use myth and folklore to pose as supernatural creatures? Again, those are the only two options, there's no middle ground. These players are always looking for more information, so they ask them more questions. They learn the traditional greeting is "be pleased," usually joined by a bow. Immediately, Grog misreads this as "beep beep," so that's his new bidet for this trip. That's a weird sentence. And when they ask about bringing something back for Jarrett, he asks for a spice called fusaka. He could use that for his food. They dress in lighter clothes for the hot climate they're expecting, and when Vax is starting to get worried about how hot his armor is going to be, Taliesin describes draping him in white silk, the same way the Templars used to dress for the heat while still wearing their armor. I mean, Taliesin is a 4,000-year-old eldritch being, so of course he would know. They return to Gilmore's, and he casts Teleportation Circle and sends them through the portal, and they all appear in a closet. They tumble out and find themselves in a bedroom. Vex looks under the bed and finds a box of letters, which we later learned out of game was a stack of Gilmore's old love letters. She puts them back, and they leave the room and find an elderly couple in the middle of a meal.
I am sorry, let me introduce. I am Sorin Gedemore. This is Opesa Gedemore. You know our son.
Yes,
Yes, we do.
For quite some time.
Quite well.
Gilmore is originally Gedemore. He changed his name when he went for better business into the Taldori place.
Yes.
I'm glad he's doing well.
I love the detail that Gilmore essentially anglicized his name. Because aside from the fact that it makes more sense that Gilmore changed his name, since Gilmore doesn't really sound Middle Eastern, the very fact that Gilmore changed his name actually delivers a ton of world-building information. It implies that there are some major cultural differences between these cultures, and that in order for Gilmore to strike out on his own and become a successful businessman, he apparently felt the need to shed his old identity or even take on a new name. Like, even if this was done purely for branding purposes because Gilmore wanted a catchier name for his shop, that still kind of says a lot, because it kind of confirms that the people of Taldori have implicit biases, just like a lot of people in our world might. And you don't even need to do anything with this, or it doesn't move the story forward for Gilmore or anything like that, but it is one of those details that immediately makes the entire world feel so much more real. It's a perfect example of how a little bit of world building goes a long way. Now, when the party asks Gilmore's parents about Fusaka, they don't recognize the name, so the players start to wonder if maybe that's an illicit material. Maybe spice is a euphemism. The party turns into mist and flies to Ank'Harel. They arrive at around 2 in the morning, and since the gates are closed, they decide to camp outside the city for the night. That way they can properly enter the city and follow appropriate channels, rather than risk being punished for being caught sneaking into the city. That would be a bad start, especially in a brand new culture with brand new customs and brand new laws, and from what they've heard, some pretty strict punishments for those laws. As if to confirm this point, they create the mansion outside the city walls, a good distance away to make sure everyone feels at ease, and still some guards come down off the wall and confront Vox Machina about the weird purple glowing magical door they created. They're told that magic is allowed in the city, but they don't recognize this magic, so there are going to be crossbows trained on the doorway all night, and once they're in the city, they should be cautious of the magic they use. They don't get any more guidance than that. This is not like Vasselheim, where there's strict delineation between divine magic and arcane magic. They just say, if we don't recognize your magic, we might give you some beef, and that's enough for the party to go, well, what magic is recognizable and what's safe? Well, you don't know yet. That's the point, it's a new culture. In the morning, Vax sneaks from Keyleth's room to his room, but rolls a 1, so he spends a luck point, and rolls another 1. So, of course, Vex walks out of her room and sees Vax mid-walk of shame, and she retches, but makes sure to throw up a supportive thumbs up. And then, and I'd completely forgotten this happened until some people pointed out in the comments a couple episodes ago, but Vax finally gets a second to talk to Vex about what Sondor said to her. She confirms that she felt like Sondor was right about a lot of stuff. He certainly knew facts about her, but Vax reassures her that she is a good person and then makes her tell him about this dagger that Sondor was referencing. So she tells the story that I referenced in that episode, and again, he comforts her by saying she's not a bad person, and they promise to, talk more about this stuff. They should open up with each other more often. They all leave the mansion and head into the city, and they decide to shoot their shot. We'd like to talk to Jamansa Ord or one of their advisors, please. The guards say, okay, you can come into the city, but if Jaman says no, y'all have to leave the city for being, liars and frauds. But for now, welcome to Ank'Harel. Now, they're told they can find some lodging in this uncut bazaar, so they start talking about do they want to go there first or look somewhere else for that spice. And Scanlan points out that any shopping they could do probably could happen in the bazaar, but rather than get sucked into another moment of analysis paralysis, which it does seem like they're heading toward, he cuts the chase and just flags down some local kids for directions. The kids point the way towards this uncut bazaar, sounds like that is where they want to go. And then, well, Scanlan has one more question.
Thank you so much, young men, for your help. Also, spice?
Yes! No, oh my god!
No.
No.
Do you spice?
Do you spice?
Yo, you cool? You cool, dog?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh god!
I'm not an authority. Do you spice? Spice it?
I'm sorry, I'm confused.
Let's go. Ignore that part. Thank you so much. What do you think? A little spice?
Kind of just puts his hand out.
I flip him a coin.
Takes it.
Good luck finding your fruit.
Okay, thank you.
And they both kind of walk away, but at a slow pace, looking over their shoulder at you the whole way.
They seemed legit. They seemed like they were street kids.
What
They would have
about that was legit?
they're riffraff. They could know what's spicy.
They were carrying fruit and
Man, they look normal, but I've got a keen eye for these things. I was a kid on the street for a long time.
Sam, no joke. Thanks for the ab workout.
And it begins. The party makes their way to the Sun-Cut Bazaar, and they sort of spread out. Keith buys some local fruits, which Matt has to invent in the moment. Percy's looking for a soothsayer or a card reader. Grog finds a little red stone that he's convinced must be magical. And Scanlan stands at a corner, muttering spice at anyone who passes by. Percy and Vex sit down in front of a card reader, who is completely blind. Percy asks about a garment, a man, and the great big conflict in their future. Matt once again has to make up something on the spot, so he describes some evocative imagery on the cards, and that is impressive. To make up some strange imagery for tarot-adjacent cards off the top of your head, it's pretty cool. But honestly, you could come up with anything and find a way to justify it. Like, you could find any explanation for the imagery to line up with the narrative that's being spun, so I don't think what's on the cards is the most important part. What's more interesting are the answers themselves.
This garment you seek. It looks to be in motion, moving. If you seek this garment here, may haste take you. You seek this man, yet it is not a man you seek. To where the luck brings you, the answers lie. The path is to change historic, but many will fall as the transition is to take. Take your time wisely, for the hourglass runs quickly.
We're going to check back in with these predictions as the storyline plays out, because Matt is doing some very careful foreshadowing here. He's not giving his players the answers. He's not saying, hey, this one-eyed merchant you're looking for lives on the corner of Finch and Maple, apartment 3B, the cloak is in a go bag in the garage. The players are still going to have to play the game and figure out the answers on their own. But Matt is dropping some hints here. And notice, once again, with two of these answers, he's reminding them of the ticking clock. That final answer is basically the entire thing we talked about earlier, with Gilmore's health. Matt is reminding them that they can't keep postponing this fight with Thordak forever, so they gotta get going. And then Vex asks for one more question. And I wish I could play this clip, but the background music is so loud for this part. So basically, she asks if she made the right choice, and he answers, "You've made many choices, but the one you speak of brings unity and a new dawn." And I haven't been calling out the card imagery so far because I don't super think they matter, but in this case, the cards are literal. One depicts two hands holding each other, and the other card shows a sunrise. Meanwhile, a half-elf takes Scanlan aside and asks about the spice he's been seeking out. He says he knows a guy who could get him some fusaka, but it would be too conspicuous to meet back here, so yeah, it definitely does sound like it's an illicit material. They agree to meet up in a casino later tonight. Scanlan asks for enough to get him through a week of heavy use.
I mean this with all due respect. Being as small a man as you are, you have to be careful.
Don't tell me what to do. I can take it, all right? Let's just say that when I started using, I was your height.
He backs off, hands up. He goes. Very well. Very well. The amount you ask?
Oh my god.
I have no specific amount. I'd have to inquire, but I would say to be safe, bring about 200 gold pieces with you, just in case.
That's a lot of drugs.
It won't be. It'll be pure. Not cut with anything else. I want the good stuff.
God.
He looks at you confused and like,
Am I just buying cinnamon here?
It might be.
It's gonna be a living baby. They're just gonna hand you a baby.
It's gonna be like a pound of turmeric or something.
The players are starting to wonder if maybe this is why Jarrett can't go back to Ank'Harel. Yikes. Now, the guards had told them about 3 places they could stay. The Shade, the Corner Cove, or the Debt's Respite. When they're in the Bazaar, they get pointed toward the Shade, because it's the closest. When they discover it's basically just a huge tent with a bunch of curtains dividing up each room, it's kind of just a huge hookah bar. The players are not really interested in that, so they ask about 2 other places, and those are more conventional taverns. The Corner Cove's 2 miles away, the Debt's Respite's only 1 mile away in the other direction. But then the party asks about a one-eyed merchant warrior, and they learn that these scar bearers are merchant warriors, and one of their members runs the Debt's Respite, so that is the best place to go. I think it's interesting that Matt didn't steer them directly toward that one place. He let them ask around at the Shade first and find out about a tavern that might have the answers they're looking for. I think it reflects Matt's approach to introducing them to the city of Ank'Harel. We've talked before on this series about the ways Matt introduces the party to new cities. In Crackhammer, he basically allowed them to completely set their own agenda, wandering wherever they wanted, and he really didn't put any pressure on them to send them toward any one place. It was very open world style. In Vasselheim, they were on an official mission for the Holy Clergy, so they got an escort who walked them through the city, and all they could do was just listen to Matt describe things. And at the time, they wanted to make decisions, but they were essentially discouraged from doing so. But this scene demonstrates a third approach, one that falls somewhere in between these two extremes. Vox Machina is definitely allowed to wander freely and figure out what they want to do and where they want to go and get up to whatever shenanigans they want to get up to.
Spice. Spice. You spice it? Spice.
However, they also do have an objective in town, and Matt is nudging them toward it. But he's also gotten much better at gently nudging his party in the direction they need to go. He wants them to land at the Debt's Respite, so they do hear that name when they first enter the town, among some other names for other places they can stay. So now, it's on the list. But that's not the closest location, that's the Shade. However, he also knows they're never going to stay at the Shade long term. They want more privacy than that. But that's a place where the party can ask around for more information, which is exactly what they do. Not only does he place the Debt's Respite closer than the Corner Cove, but then when they ask about the right phrase, Merchant Warrior, they learn the Debt's Respite would be the place to go. However, Matt does not fast-track them directly toward the Debt's Respite or even toward the Shade, the way he did in Vasselheim, because he knows his players want to enjoy the space. They want to enjoy being tourists in a fantasy city for a minute. And that's enormously fun. It's fun to wander around an imaginary market and find cool things to do. The two boys Scanlan were talking to were carrying fruit, so now Keith wants to buy fruit. And at first she's able to buy some apples, but she wants something more unique to this region, so Matt invents something. Percy wants to talk to an oracle about their task, specifically because he knows most of these people are deeply crooked, and he'll spread the word that some strangers in town want to find the cloak and want help against a great battle. Scanlan is obviously doing his drug deal, but this is essentially Matt setting his players loose in a new sandbox, no pun intended, and allowing them to explore the space before eventually getting back on the tracks themselves. Speaking of which, they decide to get a booth in the Shade and smoke some hookah, so at the very least, they can debrief about Scanlan's deal.
I don't want to go alone.
Well, I'll go with you.
Are you cool?
Of course I'm cool. I'm so cool, darling.
Okay.
I'm cool.
Me too.
Well,
No, what do you mean? We're cool.
I don't want to draw too much attention, but I want to be safe.
Are you buying drugs?
And while they're unwinding, Grog buys a ridiculously fancy drink called the Sand Keg's Hide. Each bottle is 350 gold, so of course he buys 2 bottles and overpays by 100 gold. And when Percy and Keyleth have some, it actually gets them drunk and makes their tongues fully numb. In an episode full of bangers, we get yet another banger.
I take them by the cheeks. Can you feel this?
Yeah.
You can. Can you feel this?
Does it taste good?
Do you recommend it?
The shenanigans you get from being in a new city. They also learn that this drink is crafted from the venom of a creature called the Sand Keg, which we later learn is a lot like an Ank'Harel. There's obviously a bit of a conversation to be had here about stereotypes of other cultures, especially since we're now in a Middle Eastern-inspired city where they've been told punishments are brutal and the people eat and drink weird shit. But on the other hand, they also do just eat apples and smoke hookah and do other perfectly normal stuff, and clearly your average Marquesian is not spending 350 gold to get drunk on the Sand Keg's Hide. In a much broader sense, GMs should absolutely be allowed to create civilizations inspired by non-white cultures in our own world. And in fact, I think your world needs non-white cultures in it. So maybe the idea of a cultural identity being used in a fantasy world is something we'll talk about another day, because I personally don't think Matt is doing anything wrong here necessarily, but I'm also not an expert, and diving into this in more detail in the future will require talking to people far better educated than me on these subjects. So if you've got some thoughts on this, let me know in the comments. Let me know if there's anything I should eventually keep in mind when I do tackle this subject in a future video. In the meantime, the party visits the Debt's Respite, which seems run down from the outside, but is actually a really busy tavern inside. The owner is a bronze dragonborn, with no tail, named Treve Bonebreaker, and they get some rooms here. Vex is able to negotiate a cheaper rate for the rooms by telling him that Draconia has fallen, and telling him all the gory details. And at first, Treve is happy about what happened, but as he hears more about it, it starts being a little bit less fun for him. That definitely mirrors the experience the Ravenites of Draconia had, and that tells me that Matt is characterizing Treve as someone reasonable, someone who could be negotiated with. That sends a useful message to the party as well. Treve confirms that the one-eyed merchant warrior is Mistress Asharu, and he can get in touch with her. The party writes a message to Mistress Asharu, and Treve sends a messenger to deliver it. Vax tails that messenger through the side streets and alleys and watches them slip the package into a hidden mail slot of a furniture store. So now Vax knows where the package was delivered in case they want to try to talk to Mistress Asharu on their own terms. Grog also asks if there's a fighting pit in town, and Treve says there are gladiatorial games, but they're months away from now. So Matt is confirming that this does exist in Ank'Harel, but not right now. So don't waste the session trying to get into a brawl just for fun. If you want to do that, come back after the Chroma Conclave storyline. That is so smart. However, if someone wants to duel to the death, they could agree on terms with the Hand of Ord, the local peacekeeping force, and then the aggrieved parties battle in the Bowl of Judgment. So, I don't know, if I'm Grog, I'm probably just wondering how long it is until you can get someone to agree to a duel with you. Anyway, the party goes and buys a red shirt for Scanlan and then tries to get their hands on whatever weapons or potions they can find. But they do find someone selling potions, but Percy does a terrible job of haggling, and he loses out on the deal entirely. They decide to swing by the Cerulean Palace to at least try to talk to Jamon's Ord just to see what happens. They speak with some of the staff and eventually enter an elevator that takes them all the way up this humongous glass tower. And at the top, they enter the throne room of Jamon Sa'ord, an androgynous, not quite human figure in very simple attire. And as Jamon greets them, that is where they end the session. Now, as a note, at this point in 2016, I don't think the players really had the language to discuss non-binary and agender individuals, but I believe folks on social media were able to explain the proper terminology before the next game, so the players, or at the very least Matt, could start properly using they-them pronouns for figures like Jamon. And it's a very welcome change. It helps a lot and I'm pretty sure it happens in the next session. And we're going to be back to discuss that game next week. That's right, we're doing weekly Demystified for a bit to celebrate the release of the new season of Legend of Vox Machina. So on Thursday, October 10th, we're going to discuss episode 66, A Traveler's Gamble. However, this wasn't actually the next game for these players, because they took a week off for Liam to run another one-shot, while Matt, Marisha, and Taliesin were at Burning Man. And one of my patrons has actually commissioned that one-shot for a bonus Demystified, so on Monday, we're going to talk about The Screw Job, the evil party one-shot run by Liam O'Brien. That's going to be a fascinating episode to discuss, especially for anyone who wants to run an evil D&D game, maybe even for spooky season, and maybe you're curious about the potential pitfalls. And of course, I think Liam is an incredible GM, so we're going to have a lot to learn from watching him run another game. So if you want to catch both those videos as well as a bunch of other cool stuff I'm cooking up, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. Support me on Patreon or become a YouTube member to help me keep the lights on. Join my Discord server to hang out with other awesome people, and sign up for my newsletter to catch all of my cool updates. All those links are in the doobly-doo below, along with a link to check your voter registration. One of our two political parties keeps trying to kick people off of voter rolls, so make sure to double check, make sure your registration status is up to date. And also, I don't know, just a thought, maybe don't vote for the folks who want to restrict everyone's rights to vote. Like, come on, this is such an easy choice. Come on. Speaking of easy choices, you should choose to watch Monday's video. It's about a new approach I'm using to prep my games. Until next time, play fair and have fun.